pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you are God and that there is none like you. And here we are tonight, dear God, in your presence. We ask, oh Heavenly Father, that you be present amongst us as we begin our activities marking this 90th anniversary of the Gingerland Chapel. Tonight, dear God, we come to present to the community how the chapel has impacted lives over the last 90 years. We ask that you will be with each of the presenters as they carry us down memory lane. God, be with us. Bless each one, those who are amongst the congregation, those who are listening or will listen on the internet. We thank you, God, that you give us mediums through which we can reach others through you. Lord, just be present with us and have your way. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hobson. Good evening, one and all. Welcome, as we said, to the first part of the celebration of the 90th anniversary of this chapel. I am Harrison Rose Manners, and I'm the moderator for this evening. We may ask ourselves, why are we, as the theme says, looking down memory lane? A historical review of our church and the impact in the community. And we may ask, why are we doing this? What is the significance or the importance of history? And I found here that studying history, because history doesn't stay behind us. Although we know when we say history, we say only what behind us. It doesn't stay behind us. Studying history helps us to understand how events in the past made things happen today. So the lessons of the past. We are not only about ourselves, but how the things came to be. How others initiated projects, and this may give us ideas of how we ourselves can move forward and initiate projects. It is a way of encouraging. It is a way when we look at what our forefathers have done and those before us, we feel that pride and we want to make it happen again or to continue. We want to create our own projects. When we hear how sometimes some simple people, what they have done, and because of them, we stand on their shoulders, and we have our Methodist Church today. We have Gingerland Methodist Church 90 years after. So today, we have with us 4 members of the panel, or presenters. The 4 presenters will have 3 to 5 minutes each to present. After they have all presented, then I am going to open it to the floor for the questions. The first presenter we would have is, to my left, we have Reverend Franklin E. Manners, and he's going to speak about the church's ministry, baptisms, weddings, and funerals. On my far right, we have Brother Hansel Manners, and he's going to give us an overview of the church history. What year, what happened, and how the chronological order. On my left, I have Brother Elvin Bailey, and he's going to speak about the church and community, how the church relate or impact with hospitals, prisons, even elections. And the one and only lady who we are so glad to have tonight, Sister Avril Williams. She's going to give us insights of how the church, what impact it had on education. So, without any further ado, we're going to ask Reverend Franklin Manners to speak for 3 to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Good evening, brothers and sisters. I have been asked to share something on the subject of the church's ministry. Let me point out from the outset that I propose to say a bit more than just baptisms, weddings, funerals, as has been suggested. That was simply put there as an example. So, in an effort to help us better understand what we are speaking about when we speak about the church's ministry, I would like to quote two verses from St. Mark's Gospel, chapter 3, verses 13 to 15, which read, "He went up," that is, Jesus went up the mountain and called to him those whom he wanted. And they came to him, and he appointed 12, whom he also named apostles, to be with him, to be sent out to proclaim the gospel, and to have authority to cast out demons. What we have in this passage is an account of Jesus commissioning his earliest disciples. He was calling them, if you will, to ministry. And in this account of Jesus' commissioning his disciples to go out in mission, we find a 3-point program. And I want to highlight these 3 points because I believe they help us to understand what we are speaking about when we speak about the church's ministry. The first of these 3 points is summed up in the words, to be with him. Jesus called his disciples to be with him. For us, being with Jesus today implies worship, it implies fellowship, all of which are realized through prayer and Bible study and public worship. The objective in being with Jesus, I'm suggesting, is that we as his followers might understand better the mind of Christ, that we might be kindled by his vision, that we may be able also to share something of his relationship with God the Father. So the first program, the first reason for the church's existence, if you will, is so that we might be with Jesus, that we might share fellowship with him. So when we meet together Sunday after Sunday, we didn't just come here to see our fellow Christians, even though we do that, but we are also here to be with Jesus, to share fellowship with him. The second part of the 3-point program is proclamation or preaching. So the church's ministry also involves preaching or proclamation. Preaching the good news, that is the gospel. Speaking the word of life to the world. And all Christians are called to share in this ministry, not just the clergy. So proclaiming the gospel is not just the task of those who go into the pulpit, but all Christians are called to share in that task, albeit in different ways. So when the Sacred Arts Ministry do their thing in church, they are in their way proclaiming the good news. They're not just dancing, but they are through their dance helping to proclaim the gospel. I said earlier that all Christians have a responsibility to participate in the work of proclamation. And so, down through the ages, we have worked out what we call the priesthood of all believers, where all Christians are taking part in the ministry of proclamation. Thirdly and lastly, the church exists in ministry to be of service to others. Now, in the passage read earlier, this is suggested by Jesus' reference to casting out demons. Now, that is but one example of the church's service to the community. Others include feeding the multitudes, healing the sick, seeking the lost. But let me focus for a minute on casting out demons. Some would argue that the church continues to cast out demons today as it helps people to get over mental illness. And there are many such who suffer from this illness in our homes, on our streets, and not just in our mental institutions. The cry increasingly is, renew a right spirit within me. And so the church has the responsibility of helping people get over these things that hinder their full life. Now, finally, with reference to baptisms, weddings, and funerals, these are things that the church does as it seeks to serve the community. And of course, that is an outworking of what the church is about. Baptisms, bringing persons into the fellowship of the church, which is what baptism is all about. Weddings, consecrating the life together and setting them out as Christian families. And funerals, where we bring the curtains down, as it were, on a life of service in the world. So that, in a nutshell, my brothers and sisters, is what constitutes the church's ministry in the world.
We thank Reverend Franklin Manners as he tried his best within 3 to 5 minutes to put together, the church's ministry. And as he said, not just baptism and weddings and funerals, but he spoke about also, we are with Jesus and the proclamation or the preaching, but we would get more into it when the open period has come. It is now our pleasure to hear Brother Hansel Manners on the historical review. Thank you, Brother Hansel Manners.
Good evening, brothers and sisters. That is my task, yes. I would think 3 to 5 minutes is a bit short though.
I'm going to stop you.
You will stop me. The reason why, I have prepared a paper for inclusion in the newsletter, which I think we'll get on Sunday. And it's 4 pages long, and what I'm attempting to do now, or would attempt to do, is to summarize or pick the main points from it. So if I go over time a little bit, I'm sure I will be pardoned. A historical review of the Gingerland Chapel. Most of what I have written, I have prepared, I got from the oldest member of this church, Mr. Selwyn Hobson, who of course is a natural resource for this kind of thing. We sat together for about 2 hours at his house over drinks. I had Nelson Spring water and he had Navy Springs. And he gave me a lot of good information. First of all, a background history of the Methodism in Nevis. Methodism came to Nevis in 1797 when an English missionary by the name of Thomas Coke landed on Nevis, I think on the 19th of June. He had been on his way to North America, sent by his superiors in England, and his ship blew off course and they landed really in Antigua. So from Antigua they spread out to the different islands. So Dr. Thomas Coke brought Methodism to Nevis in 1797. By 1787, not 97. By 1790, they had built a church in Charlestown and had a congregation there. In 1801, just about how many years after? 10, 11 years after, the church had spread to Gingerland, and the church was opened on this spot in 1801 by Reverend Brownell. We don't have much information about the church over those years in the buildings, but we know that the church building was destroyed by an earthquake in 1843 and obviously rebuilt. The social conditions of Nevis at the time, I love to mention that because it gives a background. As you all know, slavery had been abolished in the West Indies in 1834, effectively in 1838. And in the 1930s, the people of Nevis and the people of Gingerland were still feeling the effects of those 200 years of slavery and consequent abolition. Sugarcane and cotton were the main agricultural crops in the 1930s. Sugarcane was produced both for shipping to St. Kitts and also for home consumption being produced at the mill at New River. So many Nevisians were involved in agricultural pursuits, producing either cane or cotton. Cotton was also a major crop. And most homes also grew their own grown provision because people at that time lived off the land. They grew their own potatoes, yams, tanias, the whole bunch as it were. And so that was the state of Nevis at that time when the church was introduced in 1930s. In other words, people were not as well off as we are today. Many people didn't have regular jobs, even civil service jobs. People worked in the land, and that is how most of us grew up, who were born just after that time.
4 minutes have gone.
4 minutes have gone? I told you it wasn't going to be. The Anglican, okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead, though. I'll give you a little more.
I'll give you a little more.
Yes.
But let me skip that. This article will be published in the newsletter so you can read it on Sunday. Construction of this building. This building was built in 1930, from what we understand, started in 1930 and was dedicated in 1932. The minister at the time, we are told, was Reverend William Sunter, an Englishman, who worked in several islands in the Leeward Islands, from St. Kitts to Nevis and back and forth. It is said that he knew something about construction, and it would seem that he put all that to use in getting this magnificent edifice built. So 1932 is when the church was dedicated. And Mr. Hoffner remembers a sister of his getting christened in December 1932 with 3 other babies. I could mention here too that in the 1930s, apparently they had many more christenings than we have now. I actually counted them in the baptismal register in Charlestown. We have a register of baptisms going back to 1787, etc. And I got intrigued by what I saw, so I counted the baptisms for 1930, and I got 39. So I looked on and I counted 1940, and I got 40. I said that because compared to now, I don't think we have 5 or 6 baptisms per year in this church. So compared to those days. Over the years, the church originally had shingle roof, got what we call, the old time wooden shingles that we knew as we grew up. But they were later changed to felt, and as you know now, we have galvanized sheeting. Most of us know that there have been recent changes. The floor has been tiled. The gallery upstairs has been refurbished. We have put in place a new multimedia system. And so the church is now, and new pews and whatnot. So the church is now a fairly modern structure which caters not only to Methodists, but to community groups throughout Gingerland and maybe throughout Nevis. A few tidbits you might be interested in. I'm trying to cut it short. Mr. Hobson tells me that in the early 1930s, we had a belfry at the top of the church here, and the sexton used to come and ring the bell. He tells me that in the early years there was no belfry there. The bell was hung in a tree in the backyard. And so that is where the sexton went to ring the bell. He also tells me that He used to ring the bell to notify people that church was due. So on Sunday morning, churches used to start at 11 o'clock. Don't know if some of you remember, not only did it start at 11, but we used to eat our heavy meal of rice and cornmeal and fish before we came to church. That was the practice. But he would ring the bell at 9 to warn people, if you're up in the bush looking after goats, it's time to head home. Then another ring at 10, and then a ring just before 11 to warn everybody, etc., etc. As I said, the tidbits will be published in the magazine, but I'll mention one other one because I see Hyacinth watching me. That intrigued me. Most of us know that in the 1930s, there were no funeral homes in Nevis. And so when people died, you couldn't take them to a funeral home. You kept them in the house, and you did, well, not me, I would have been afraid. We kept them and we did all we had to do at home and prepared the burial, the body for burial there. They would call it carpenters, and I saw that growing up, because my father was a carpenter, and they would build a coffin right there in the garage or in the yard, and pack the body and take it off to the burial ground. This one made me laugh when Mr. Hobson told me this, that there were cars, so the people had to walk with the coffins. So if you died in Cox, a few strong man from Cox would have to walk with the coffins from Cox to the church. And they rested on the way. It's all here in the document. And so as they walked, somebody would walk, people would walk with 2 chairs. And so I think the chicken stone, they had to rest on the thing for a rest, and then lift it up again and head to church. I found that, I'd never seen that, and I found that somewhat comical even to listen to. But those are some of the things that you'll find in the article on Sunday, that you'll see on Sunday. There are no telephones, as you know, in our homes. And there was no telephone at the manse either. So people found it difficult. If you had a death in the family, you wanted to reach the minister. Imagine the problem they had if there was no telephone. And when you reached the manse, the minister wasn't there, and you couldn't get him till the next day and whatnot, and so on and so on. As I said, it's all here, so I'll have to stop and respond to questions. I can't really say anything this time.
Thank you very much, Brother Hansel Manners. It is very interesting, and I know some of it will come out again as our audience, have questions about it. Because these little stories are usually intriguing to see how people lived and what they did in those days. Thank you very much. Your research is not wasted, as I said. You're going to put it on Sunday. And then we're supposed to have a singing and reminiscing, maybe in that, when was that supposed to be?
Thursday.
On Thursday. So that I know people would reminisce, and those stories will be very important. Thank you very much, Brother Hansel Manners. On my left, we have Brother Elvin Bailey, and he reminded me that there is an excuse from Sister Hailita Liebert, who was supposed to be a presenter this evening, but is not here. Excuse, I think, is ill health. So we have Brother Bailey, who's going to double up. So timekeeper, he's doubling up. He's going to do the church and community, hospitals, prisons, the electorate and how it affected them. And he's also going to touch on Mrs. Liebert's presentation, groups and organizations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Moderator. Actually, it's the reverse. I'm going to spend time talking about the groups and organizations and the impact on the community, taking you down memory lane. And then for a small amount of time, I'm going to talk about the other things. And like Hansel, I'm serving you notice.
I have a timekeeper.
Oh, that's fine. And I'm serving you notice because somebody on this panel thought that I could talk long. And so assigned me to the responsibility of bringing the message from Her Honor, Hailita Liebert. And I have to do her justice tonight. All right. I had a long talk with Mrs. Liebert this afternoon. Lasted all of an hour and a half. And I only left because another engagement came. It was that interesting. But she talked about her experiences here in the church from the perspective of her own personal experience and the groups and organizations that existed then, cease to exist now, and the new ones that are existing. We know that the Sunday school, the youth fellowship, the boys brigade, and the boys brigade came through several steps: life boys, anchor boys, and then the big boys, men, young men. Junior choir, men in action, sacred arts ministry, girls and boys brigade, the Wesley Guild. Don't know how many of you would have heard of the Wesley Guild. She told me her father used to tell her about it. The women's group, now called the Women's League. The Girls' Life Brigade, now called the Girls' Brigade. The Methodist Young Women Association, and I'm told Avril is one of the last remaining members. The Junior Youth Fellowship, Gospel in Touch Band, Steel Pan, or Methodist Melodies, as they're called. Mrs. Liebert started by telling me she's a Cox girl. She's from Cox. And Cox was one of the biggest catchment areas for this church. And she listed the areas that it served. Some, again, no longer exist. St. Peter's no longer exists. Nobody lives down there. But it was drawing people from as far as St. Peter's, which is the upper section of Brown Hill. And who said they didn't have cars? They all used to walk to church. So her earliest recollection is as a child coming out of Cox as part of that mass movement out of Cox to the Gingerland Methodist Church. Walking all the way up the hill, through Beaumont, through Clegot, and so on to reach here. She said to me the parents would tell them, go ahead until we come. And then the parents will catch them up and put them on their shoulders and bring them to church. The parents will bring their children to church. And that is an important step. She talked about her foundational years. She, of course, was baptized here. But she remembers a Reverend Alan Keedy, who brought her more closely into the fold, because he had started a reception class. He was an itinerant minister, a very short itinerant minister, a 3-month itinerant minister, who came here from the UK, started a reception class, but his time here didn't allow him to go as deeply into the doctrines and the philosophies that were required to train people up into the church. And he asked her, when he was leaving, to assist in bringing the people along. That was her first direct intervention in the church, working with these people. That is when the Junior Youth Fellowship was formed. She mentioned some names of persons who were in the Junior Youth Fellowship who still today are worshiping here and making their contribution, not only in the Gingerland Methodist Church, but in the Gingerland community and further afield. She talked about the weekly sessions that they used to have, teaching about the catechism, doing dramatic presentations, preparing for concerts down in the school hall. And I'll make a plug. It needs fixing, so send your donations in. But that is where the concerts and so on used to be held. She remembers those meetings with a bit of a long. She talked about the youth camps they used to have. She talked about the people who would have supported her in her effort to bring these people along and bring them up into the church. Some of them are in the congregation here tonight. However, that group lost its membership apparently when the Girls and Boys Brigade began to flourish. It pulled those people into the Girls and Boys Brigade. And in a way presented a foundation for the Girls and Boys Brigade to grow to what it is now. 100 strong. 100. And going. She had a junior choir going. She talked about how that junior choir started. Reverend Bowers, of blessed memory, who loved to sing and loved music, again encouraged her into starting this junior choir. That junior choir, and she gave the example of one girl, the theme was, if you have a voice, you can sing to the glory of God. And there was a girl there who had a voice, but couldn't sing. And the people used to tease her. But they nurtured her, they worked with her, and she became one of the best soloists in that group. And she's emphasizing, this was our motto, and still is, if you have a voice, you can sing to the glory of God. The junior choir is still singing to the glory of God. Talked about the Young Women's Association, the Gingerland Young Women's Association. That was the brainchild of a minister's wife, Reverend Elkanah Edwards' wife. I don't remember her first name. Okay. Well, I'm reporting. I will stand corrected. But that group was started by the minister's wife, and it was for those women who were women, but not yet old enough to be members of the Women's League. So they wanted something that was younger in outlook, and that was the answer to that church group. So that kept going and was going well until, for whatever reason, it fell apart. She talked about how they used to have garden parties. What's that?
We'll have soon.
We'll have soon. Valentine tea parties. What's that?
We'll have soon.
Okay. Christmas concerts, and so on. And all of these things were used to bring the people together and keep them together. She was a member of the senior choir, and she remembers the wonderful singing, the songs that they used to sing, the organist leading them, Teacher Frank with his tuning fork, okay, and the concept of tonic sulfur. And for those of you who are listening and for those of you who are watching, that's part of your homework. Look up what tonic sulfur is. But that is how the choir had to be trained when there was no resident organist. And so they used to do their singing a cappella, but in harmony. And they used to sound good. And the organ was, there was no organ, so they had to project their voices and sing to the glory of God. She talked about the organist over there. She talked about the Sacred Arts Ministry, and she noted that the Sacred Arts Ministry is really for the younger folks, because that includes the dance and the drama and so on, liturgical dance and so on. I asked her a few questions. Then, you're from Cox, which was a catchment area only for the Methodist Church, essentially, as you were coming up for over 90 years. What has happened? Why so many people are not of Cox, are not coming to church in the Gingerland Methodist Church? And she offered a few reasons, and I'm going to share them because I think they're important. Immigration, she said, in the 50s and the 60s, played a huge role in moving people away from news. Social development, television and so on, presented a distraction, so people no longer came together after hours in the Methodist Church, and because of that, we lost something. The society's changed. I asked her the question, when you all were fellowshipping, meeting in the evening, etc., 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 were any love connections made? And her response, in a word, was no. Because people were coming together, understanding each other, getting to know each other, and some of them found companions, lifelong companions in that thing. We're talking about impact on the community. Who said about baptisms declining? It's all related. Now, I know. For her, she summed it up this way. Church, as Reverend Manuel said, was for worship and fellowship and so on. Giving, that's the prescribed rule. It also allowed for socialization. It allowed for entertainment. It was a training ground for her It provided great role models for her. And this is where she learned good moral behavior and learned the principles of leadership. Methodist Church, Gingerland Methodist Church, imbuing that into her. And I think goes without doubt that she herself has now become one of the greatest role models for us here in Nevis. Now, very quickly, prisons, hospitals.
You have given some of your time to the other presenter.
So stop
we will
now?
have the time, people. Give him just 3 minutes, please.
Okay. We go to visit the sick and the shut-in, we go to the prisons, we go to the hospitals, we go to where the people are, we share with them. Just Monday we had a walk through the village, which was part of it. One of the roles that is totally overlooked is that this church, the Gingerland Methodist Church, has played its role in the whole issue of governance and democracy. I remember the first time I voted in the church hall. It was used as a polling station. And when the church hall became unusable, we voted at the vestry, the law vestry, until when I became in charge of that section. I tried to move it away as much as possible from the churches. Not always successfully, but we moved into the government building. So the church, and at our Bible study, I challenged the minister about the role of the church in politics and governance and so on. And he gave a very erudite answer. But the church, the Methodist Church as a group, and the Gingerland Methodist Church, has played its role in the whole concept of democratization and governance. And the final thing I want to do is to share with you, the audience and the listening, a few words that I used to use, I used to hear that are no longer being used. Bazaar, outing, the tuning fork, and I spoke about that a while ago. Tonic sulfur, and I spoke about that a while ago. How many lofts are in the Methodist Church? Where are they? What are they called? And another word I learned, having had a discussion with her honor this afternoon, was descant. I had no clue what that meant until she explained it. So that is for you to go home and Google, find out what descant means. And that, Madam Chair, is my presentation tonight.
I want to thank you very much, Brother Elvin Bailey. And again, I say, you have a rich legacy of information there, and it will not be lost because we just want to give everybody your time, because after that, with the questioning, I'm sure you will get the opportunity to share even more, as well as the other presenters. So now we have the only female presenter we have with us, and we're happy to have you, Sister Avril Williams. And she's going to talk about the church and education, which is very important after I have moved all over the Caribbean, wherever man has served. The Methodist Church, when it comes to history, is known for educating people. Sister Williams.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Good night to my fellow panelists and persons here present. Good night to our viewing and listening audience on YouTube or Facebook. I'm pleased to be a part of this panel discussion tonight because this church has helped in a really important way to make me who I am today. And so because of that, I'm very grateful. My topic, as you've heard, is education and how the church has impacted education for the 90 years that this chapel has been in existence. I will try to stick to the topic, but there will be some overlapping because of things other persons have said before. So if you bear with me, because I've already prepared my paper and I realize that some of the things that they have said, they have trespassed on my turf. So now, the impact of the Gingerland Methodist Church on education from 1932 to the present. The impact of the Gingerland Methodist Church has had a great impact on education from 1932 to the present. But what goes along with that, hand in hand, is the chapel, because the church relates to the people. and the chapel relate to the building, but the two have to be connected. So you will hear me probably from time to time referring to the church, which is the people, and in our context here, we're talking about the Methodist people, because we know that the church has a wider meaning, you know, the people of God. I must now put the topic in context, since the impact for the 90 years did not just happen in a vacuum. Its foundation was laid way back in the late 1780s, when Methodist missionaries from England came to Nevis and sought to impart spiritual education to our enslaved forebears. This continued right on after they were freed, that is, after the enslaved were freed in 1838. The education process started in Charlestown, as far as my research has discovered, and it later advanced into day schooling there, sometime around 1840. Eventually, the movement reached Gingerland. My understanding is that a little earlier than the Methodists, the Anglican Church began to take root in Nevis. It is fair then to say that the Anglican Church and the Methodist Church became trailblazers in education on the island, seemingly in the early, mainly in spiritual, academic, and social fields. If we allow our mind's eye to move around this island, we will see buildings that are owned by these two churches. Well, two in particular for us, the Cumbermere School Hall and our school hall at the back here. And the Charlestown, the bottom floor, of the chapel that is being renovated right now. So those were used as school buildings in the early part, and then over time, government took over the administration of education and built buildings to house the children of our island. I will now focus on the aspects, the role that education plays here in Gingerland Chapel. The church has created organizations for children, youth, young adults, and adults, both male and female. Some of these organizations have operated inside the chapel, others outdoors. And the overall aim is to provide avenues for members to learn about God, our Heavenly Father, to build their faith in His Son Jesus Christ, and be enabled by His Holy Spirit to influence the society in a positive way while they live lives of integrity. That influence over time will be carried abroad because people migrate and they go overseas. So we are hoping, and we know, that persons who have gathered education here, spiritual and otherwise, they move overseas and would be able to impact the societies in which they live. Some of these organizations are presently functioning, as you've heard before, and have challenges. The church school boys brigade and girls brigade, the senior choir, Bible study group, women's league, they began in earlier times. The children's choir, Men in Action, Gospel in Touch Band, Methodist Melodies are of more recent times. All of these provide education for our people in their various ways. Education, spiritual, and sometimes health or finances or whatever. These groups provide education for our people. Now, we all know of the parenting tips that are presently heard on Bond Radio on Tuesday mornings. And that's one way of the church reaching out to the community to impart education. With the parenting tips, education is given in health matters, social matters, how parents can help their children to have integrity and health matters, home economics, various things. Those parenting tips are very important, and the church gets feedback from time to time on how people are being helped with these tips. During COVID, the church provided education on how to cope. There have been talks here in the church about how people can cope with the stress that comes from COVID. And many of our members have benefited from those. A fact that some organizations have lost their robustness over the years is evident. Some have faded, completely faded. Now I'm going to take you down to, take us back a little bit now into memory lane. First of all, I must say that sometimes the organizations, they evolve in another way. Say for instance, Bible study. Bible study is being carried on here now on YouTube because on Zoom because of modern technology. But in the past, Bible study was conducted in the chapel and sometimes out in the community too, because I recall the Reverend Kenneth Wilson. He started a Bible class in Cox Village using lighted gas lamp. That was continued by the late Brother Jimmy Brown, or James Brown, who had returned home from the U.S. And he was a Sunday school teacher here, Sunday school superintendent rather, in the chapel. And he used to walk from Brown Pasture to Cox to hold Bible class. And as young people, we looked forward to that. Open-air Sunday schools were once held in some of the villages. Missionary meetings were held there too. Children learned to recite and act in dialogues and skits, all a part of education. There was a Young Women's Association inaugurated by Mrs. Neely, the wife of Reverend Neely. Among other things, other activities that she used to hold was cake making and decorating classes at the manse, there for the members. There was once a thriving youth fellowship with meetings in the school hall. In the day, the building was used as a junior school for both boys and girls. As members of the youth fellowship, we learned so much and were able to put to work our creativity in drama, poetry, singing, etc. I remember Brother Hansel came at one time and taught us, he conducted a singing class. I remember one of the songs was, I saw little birds sitting on a treetop, little birds sitting on a treetop, and love and marriage go together like a horse and carriage, all of those things we used to learn. And I remember we used to have those Good Friday plays, and we acted in them, and some persons actually cried tears. And I remember Reverend Manners acted on a Good Friday play right in the church. He was on the cross right there. And all of that was to do with the education, because through this we learn the Bible and different things like that. There were several camps were organized over the years for various youth groups, and as young people, we went out into the community. We had camps held there, and in those camps we were able to learn social skills and things to prepare us for life. So, you know, Reverend Manners and Reverend Amika, they were brought up here in this church, grounded here in this church. The education, spiritual education, was from here. So all of that is a part of how the church prepares. Now I must talk a little bit of the academic side of things. I was told that when the earthquake of 1950 damaged the Anglican School Hall, which was the girls' school at that time, tents were provided by the U.S. to enable the carrying on of education on the grounds there, but they proved unsuitable. So this chapel was then used to school the children. I spoke to one lady who told me she attended school right upstairs here in the gallery. Sister Florissine told me she also heard Brother Frank speaking of school being held here for girls, while the boys were having school in the school hall at the back here. Now, these are few, I must say also, I know the time is going, but I must say also that the Men in Action, they have a scholarship program going, one child at Gingerland Secondary School annually, and there are other persons who do, maybe English or maths and reading on a private, on their own, to help people in the community. So the church has really had an impact on the community, and it continues to do its work, even with challenges. Thank you very much.
We thank you very much, Sister Williams. You can see that these presenters have done quite a bit of research. It is sort of embarrassing to tell them, hustle on. Yes, it is, but as moderator, I have to do what I have to do. It may be quite interesting that as part of this 90th anniversary, to put these 4 presenters' papers together and have it produced so that, we can have all that information and show them the appreciation of their time that they did look, and research for us. So we thank you all, every one of you, very much. So now it is your turn as you sit there. You've heard and you want to hear more in some areas, and the presenters are willing to share. So we can now open the floor for questions. I think the procedure will be that they stand, so you can, the procedure is come and stand so that the camera will get you. And so let us see any questions that we have coming out of this. What, anything, more in depth that you want to know about? I personally, since I'm living here, I suppose a lot of people know, I keep crying out for social entertainment through the church. I have lived in other places where some church people, their whole life is about social, not the church, but their whole social life is related to the church. You spoke about, tell me what you spoke about.
The love connection.
The love connection, but they went to, you said bazaars.
Outings, camps.
Yes. And things like that, which was very important, not just for fun, but you say for socializing and learning, how to entertain and how to.
Yeah.
So those are very, very important. And the church was the main place where they learned it. I know many people sitting here too, the first time they ever got on an aeroplane was because of the church. They had to go somewhere to present the church. So let's hear the questions that are coming. What else you want to hear from Mr. Brother Hansel Manners?
Until somebody gets up, could I just add something to
Yes.
education? Because I never experienced seeing the girls' school here. But when I was doing my research for my book that I just published, that was mentioned to me by my sister Marilyn, who also advised me that the girls' school was transferred from down there to here in the 1950s when the earthquake damaged the girls' school. You mentioned some schools as well that were used, some churches which were used as schools, schools that were attached to churches. We could also mention the New River Church. New River Church housed the primary school, the primary section, or the infant section of the New River School. I taught at New River, that's where we started working at New River School. I taught there for 3 years, and during that time, the primary school, or the infant section, was held in the church. I don't think there was any church activity there then.
Before,
Talk a
probably,
little loud.
Take the mic.
before the government built the school there, everything happened inside the church. So from Monday to Friday, it was a school place, and then on Sunday it was used for worship.
Okay. So you had to push the desk out of the way. On Sunday, yes. Okay. Something else I could maybe add is that the churches, Anglican and Methodists control education in these islands. From the time they came in after they established churches, not only did they provide schools, but they actually provided education. The education system was run by the churches until 1916, when the government took over education from the schools. They ran it from 1916, but they had no schools. All the schools we have now are recently built over the last 20, 30 years. So they use the church schools all around, Anglican. You can see them still. The Anglican school in Cottongun is still there. Humbermere School is still there. Girls' school here, boys' school here, Charlestown Girls' School, all church elements. So the church did a great job in providing education over the years and helping out government.
Were these schools at that point in time free, or did they have to pay a bit? To send my child to the school in those days?
No, I think it was free.
Free? Okay. Mm-hmm. So if it was free, how would the teachers pay?
Gingerland did.
When it was run by the churches, you mean?
Yeah, if it was run by the churches and it was free.
I think over time government slowly became involved in helping out the churches, but they fully took over in 1916. But I think in the early years they were run by the churches, also their own resources. Yes, when they started.
The church collection.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to bring, started and brought up, remember the days of the moral instruction? Yeah, so I don't know how far back that would have gone, but I remember us from infant school, chapel school, then we came here on a Tuesday morning and had the moral instruction, really. It was, I remember the Reverend Cecil Weeks with the big print, with the songs printed on a script board, and you slip it over. So that was an area that we probably need to highlight the moral instruction aspect of it. Not on camera, but okay. Yeah. Okay. The prayer meeting. Somebody up to today, somebody was mentioning the upper room. We have lost out on the upper room prayer meetings.
It's a loft.
Yeah?
Prayer loft.
Well, they used to call it the upper room. And the upper room, that's the upper, we call it now the upstairs, upper vestry or something, but that in the early 50s, 60s, we had some prayer warriors, prayer champions in this place, and they used to shake almost like the roof is coming down when they open their mouth to pray, and that seemed to be something that is lacking amongst us. I don't know, and so people nowadays are afraid to pray. I learned to pray right here amongst the older people, because parents used to pull their children wherever they went. The children went with them. And so from 5 and things, sometimes when I'm holding on my mother going up the road, I fall asleep, and you remember it's over the stones, then you had to go. Now we have all the amenities, and we have lost quite a bit of it. But remember the days of the upper room prayer. The other thing, anybody remembered one Sunday we had one, which was like a long period of drought, and it was Brother Bellet, and he had a prayer session in this church here that Sunday. And then I don't even know if we had gotten home, so rain started falling, so we, sometimes you see the result of prayer right away, and that thing is always kept in, because remember Brother Bellet had his cows and that sort of thing down at the stock, whatever it was. And so he was the preacher this Sunday, and he turned turn the service into a prayer meeting. I think we need some more of that so that people could see that prayer really works. And sometimes it happens right away, and at other times it takes quite a while. So we need to, as we look back, we need to bring some of those things forward to really help with the spiritual well-being of our people.
I would just want to say something in relation to what Sister Vinita said there about the prayer in the upper room. I was speaking to a young lady just maybe about 6 months ago, and she was recalling her time, her days here at the junior school. And she said that she used to be so blessed, even as a child, on a Friday mornings to hear the people in the upper room praying. And she used to listen to them. And it meant so much to her. And now, when she's seeking to walk in the light of Christ. But she was telling me how that prayer meeting had such an impact. So sometimes, you may do things and you don't even know how it's impacting other persons. Yeah.
That's
There's something else that I also think is worth mentioning. I can't remember who it was, one of the presenters made mention of the migration which took place in the big way in the 50s. I think it's worth noting the role that some of these people who left here played in the places that they migrated to. I can think, for instance, of those who went to Curacao and Aruba. They were the persons who started the Methodist Church in the Netherlands Antilles. Until their coming there, those Dutch islands knew nothing about Methodism. The Dutch were largely either Roman Catholic or Dutch Reformed. So they were the foundation of Methodism in the Netherlands Antilles. There was an interesting follow-up to that, in that nowadays, well, of course, I mentioned Dutch, but the spoken language in those territories was and still is Papiamento. And so there was a struggle between the local Papiamento speaking people and those who were speaking English. And so the Methodist Church in the Netherlands Antilles worships in English. And so the older people feel naturally drawn to that because that's the language they came with. But the children, having gone through the education system, speak Papiamento. And increasingly, they feel alienated from an English-speaking church. That's one thing. The other point is the Methodist Church in St. Croix, which dates back to the late 60s. One of the foundation members was a gentleman from Hickman's. I was trying to remember his name, but I wasn't successful. But the Methodist Church started there because a group of persons who migrated, met together and then petitioned the district to send a minister, and that only in the 60s. So there were persons who migrated from here and impacted the lives of communities elsewhere. Well, that's private too.
So,
the hymn too.
but, sorry. Go ahead.
I wanted to just to ask everybody here to look up into the center of the church, right up in the middle section. Let's take a look. I do that because whenever I look up in the room, I have a sense of awe because I'm very high. And it was built at a time when there were no mechanical cranes and no mechanical concrete mixers and that kind of stuff. And you have a sense of awe and respect for those who built this church because it's a big church, it's a spacious church. But my father did jobs on the roof. Once or twice he got a job to fix the roof, and I wonder how he made out that. He wasn't very tall. So I think we need to respect that. The church was when this church was built, I don't think there was anything called concrete. The materials used to build the church was stone, navy stone. But what we call concrete now was made out of terrace. If you remember the word terrace, we use that word to mean gut mold. Gut plus mixed with lime. And a lot of us don't know how we got lime. Lime was made from what I've researched. You go to the bayfront and you got old, what is it called, coral, and you brought them up, and you burnt them into a powder. I don't know what they mixed it with, and it's part of the blacksmith. And they used to burn lime and bag them, and that is what they use for cement. So imagine a church like this built, and there was no flashy cement like we have today. Look at next time you sit on the wall outside, realize how hard it is. It is very hard, and you stood there for 90 years, and it hasn't worn away. Nowadays you build a house, and after 20 years you see cracks and all kinds of things.
After a year.
Huh?
You mean after a year?
After already.
A year.
This has been here for 90 years, and there hasn't been much repairs to the walls. Okay? So, we need to respect that.
I'm trying to recall, was it up there those long things to hold the gas lamps? Suspended from all the way
Almost
up?
there.
Was it all the way up or there was some?
Not up there. Hold up there to light the lamps. They have to
No, I
light.
meant there was a
No,
suspended.
it's just something suspended.
Oh, I can't remember really. That's the other thing we should remember, that electricity was introduced in Nevis only in 1954. And it took some time for the whole island to be wired, etc. So some of us in our home didn't get electricity until 1960 something. I went to secondary school reading from lamps, hurricane lamps, and I left secondary school in 1961. So, yeah, the sexton used to have to light the gas lamp every night for service. Pump them up.
I wonder if there's any record of anybody guys having
Dropping from
yeah. I was told that my grandmother's husband fell and damaged his back. Yeah, and I was told he had a kind of home, and it was because he had fallen from working on the yeah.
Yes. And that is sorry, very interesting. I just want to make a point too that when Brother Angel spoke about baptism in 1939, it had 30 or something like that, and what's happening now. But remember, from then till now, we have had so many other denominational groups formed. So people are now Adventists and, all sorts of other things, Pentecostals, so they go all over with their babies. So
Including staying at home.
But the
including staying at home, okay.
The church population was much higher in those days too.
Maybe because there were fewer churches, fewer denominations.
Fewer churches. And people didn't have many things to do. People had to go to church because there was no TV, there was no phones and so on, so everybody went to church on a Sunday.
You have a...
I was saying the information that you have shared this evening, quite interesting, and I know it would be better on Thursday evening when persons come out to move down memory lane, but I think this is a foretaste of what's to come. But the information, I think, is it's timely, maybe for some of the younger ones who are here, but I am able to relate to quite a number of things, that has happened, throughout the years. One thing though, maybe this is on the lighter side, but it shows how, even back then, the importance of time, because it is said that Reverend Sunter, when you came to work, if you had to work for 7 o'clock, you couldn't be coming in the yard at 5 to 7 to tie your donkey to work. He said, you go back and you come back tomorrow. You had to be on time, That was the type of person he was, that instilled, in persons the value of time. And I think that sort of thing needs to be with us today, respect for time and do what it is. But I think it's very interesting, evening, and I could remember vividly Reverend Manus hanging on the cross behind there from our youth fellowship place. And I think, well, because of time, Brother Manus wasn't able to complete his presentation. But I think as a celebration for the 90th anniversary, I think a magazine ought to be in place. Notwithstanding the year, this is the 90th year. But with all the information that we are sharing this evening, it should be compiled so that generations to come, this is the first celebration we are having of the chapel, and I think the map is something as significant as a magazine, so that we can pass on to the next generation.
Thank
one
you.
other thing that I
Please come through.
discriminatory or prejudice in the early years, the baptisms, where children or babies of married parents were christened on a Sunday, and the single mothers had to come on a Monday or whatever time, Tuesday, Monday or Tuesday in the week. Well, you all remember, anybody remember when that was changed in the English system, whether prejudice or discrimination, whatever it was. That was something.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
And this is from, I guess, whoever was dealing with the spiritual aspect of it. Would you say that church 90 years ago, or even 70 years, 60 years, 50 years ago, was more spiritually driven than it is now? I ask the question because oftentimes, you know, from my end, I'm dealing with the social media aspect of it, bringing our church into this present day and putting us out there. But my observations, I guess, I've been on this planet for over 40 years. Imagine that. Yeah, but my observation, and I'm asking, was the church back then more spiritually driven than it is now? It might sound like a funny question, but I am just wondering about that.
I think it is true to say that.
Well, let me just give a little bit more background. Today we are faced with aging of our ministers and so on. And our founder, his thing was, he felt his heart strangely warmed, right? And our ministers currently, they are all majority in their 60s and 70s, you understand? There must have been some spiritual drive that pushed them into ministry. We are now in 2022 and we are struggling to have persons even candidate for ministry or even step up to be a local preacher or serve in a church capacity. So I'm just wondering, was it that our church back then was more spiritually driven than it is now?
I think a couple of things can be said in relation to that. I think, well, in my view, back then people were more focused. Someone made mention about the distractions which today's generation faces. I think people were more focused, and in relation to that, perhaps they had less distractions. I can remember my grandmother, if she came to our house on a Sunday and discovered that my father did not go to church, she expected him to answer to her. He was a grown man, all right? Nowadays, the parents come to church and, you know, they tell you quite glibly, oh, I left them home sleeping. They didn't wake up. And they move on to the next subject because they see nothing, no big thing about that. So the whole focus has changed. Then you went on to mention, the poor response to persons offering for the ministry. Again, I suppose it can also be said that we live in a different time. People's focus have changed. Okay, when we went to the college in Jamaica to be trained, it was noted that a very large percentage of Methodist ministers came out of Anguilla. And I think that has continued up to very recently. Now, this may not be entirely true or fair, but somebody made the observation that one of the reasons that is true is that in Anguilla there was little else to do. Now, that may not be the only reason they came, but it is perhaps true to say it was one of the factors. I say that because in this modern age, our youngsters have any number of vocations to choose from. And in that list, in today's context, the ministry perhaps appears to be the least attractive. They will tell you there's no money in it. Back then, people were not too concerned whether money is in it or not. It was deemed to be an honor to offer for the Methodist ministry. But, as I said, times have changed.
And not only that, yes, I'm going to let you go. Not only that, I remember in my day, 7 of us, and your parents say, one a teacher, one a parson, one a nurse, and because our parents said that, we got that. One a teacher, and they always included one half is Catholic, has to be a Catholic priest, and one, a parson. But now, parents don't say that anymore. We will allow Brother Bailey to share at this time.
I want to piggyback on, answer the question that was asked about the spiritualism in a roundabout way. In the 2-mile radius from below Brother Jimmy Brown's house to Zion, there was a milepost there, and there's a milepost down around Fenton Hill, well, maybe 3 miles. Yes, and 1 and 2. Those times we had 3 churches: church, church, chapel, mission, and Roman Catholic. Okay. Now in that 3-mile stretch of road, we have about 15, 16 denominations. All of them are passing. I am not going to, probably I'm saying that, I don't think this spiritualism in the broad sense has decreased. The spiritualism perhaps in the Methodist Church has decreased. And we all have to look internally to see what is going on to cause that. Now, again, to go back a little bit, my understanding was that this church was built with tariffs, which was mined. Not God's son, Hansel. It was mined. So there's tariffs, there's deep holes under this church for where the tariffs was mined.
What is tariffs?
The building material, the cement. My grandmother told me, the tariffs was mixed with molasses and cattle dung. Those were the building blocks, which is probably why when they were fixing the fence in Charlestown, some people were saying, no, it has to be done the old-fashioned way. But those were the building blocks. So my grandmother did her little bit, like Hansel and Franklin's father, to do the building up of the church. And I'm saying that because I don't want us to go away thinking that only the carpenters and so on were involved. The women of the church did their little bit with their dung baskets to help build this church to what it is today. So I wanted to answer the question in a different angle from which Reverend answered the question. There are many more churches now that offer the service.
Right.
Now, Ansel mentioned about the number of christenings. I am told in those days there were children after children after children after children. People were having 11, 12, 13 children. And those of you who know me know that I work in Social Security. Right. That was their pension plan.
Right.
Children, 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 children.
Assurance and insurance.
There you go. So nowadays, they have one or two or none.
Right.
Because some people are consciously deciding to have none. The mention of the christening and the discrimination, it may not be something practiced by the church per se, but we have made a conscious decision not to bring them. That's why when you talked about christening elsewhere, I said, or kept at home. Quite a lot of the people are not being christened, despite the fact that the christening paper is in fact a legal document nowadays. They have the birth certificate, and for them that's enough. So there was no need. And I understand too, in the early days, oftentimes there was no name given to the child on the birth certificate. It's the christening time that the child had a birth certificate. And name. So we don't need to do that anymore. We go straight to the registrar and tell them the names. So we don't need that aspect of having to bring the child to the church to be christened for them to get their identity. Is no longer required.
Well, you mentioned
But you
that,
see,
and I
that
found
speaks
that-
to the question she asked. I think that has happened largely because the spiritual aspect has disappeared out of it. For the average person today, the question of, you say, naming the child, which for them is an official thing, the child gets an identity. I think for many people it stops there. So the whole question of consecrating the child, that's a foreign concept for many people today.
It's funny you mention about the whole not naming the child until the child is christened. I think that actually still exists to present day, because I've met even young persons who are having children and they would have their child and you would say, what's the baby's name? And they say, the child ain't christened yet, so they can't say what the child's name is. And I'm like, it's
Superstition.
crazy. And so you call the child, they give the child, like, they
A
might
nickname.
say it's Junior, or they give an acronym, let's say TJ, his name, or AJ, or you know, or they give a completely, different name. And I found that, not to prolong anything, but it has affected how our society operates, because I will come here and your name is Franklin Manners, but from I was introduced to you, you told me that your name was Joshua. And so I'm calling you Joshua for 40 years, I'm calling you Joshua, and something happens and you pass away, and the funeral announcement comes up, and I'm hearing that Franklin Manners, not trying to kill you or anything, has passed, and I'm like, well, and then I see a picture somewhere, and I'm like, but wait, I did not know his name was Franklin Manners. I've known him all my life as Joshua, because that same thing that you mentioned about not naming the child has, it still exists up until this present day.
That naming of children is something which goes way back. I tell the story of my own parents, who were known, everybody, well, the older ones, know about Arnold Manners and Eileen Manners, my parents. So happens their names were not Eileen or Arnold. My mother's name was Cecilia Manners. Only after we became grown, we said, well, where she getting Eileen from? It's not on a birth certificate. My father's name was Arnold Manners. His name is Charles Henry Manners. So, somewhere along the line, before they christened, they called him Arnold. And then we christened. That was the practice at the time.
So keep away, John B.
people already jumping. Nobody's supposed to have
So where did the so then now that you bring that up, where did the superstition come from?
Don't forget there were slaves.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
I will, sorry, okay, I have a question. I'll let you go.
Now, as I listened, the presentations were all very interesting. A lot of food for further thought. I keep wondering, I was happy to hear the mention of the village Sunday school. Because, there is an increasing focus. Whenever we look at our annual themes that come out, there's a focus on Christian witness and outreach. And it seemed to me that we have to take another look at the potential of the village Sunday schools out in the communities. Because you have a presence and you have a chance to bring with the presence of being out here quite a few of the other elements that take place within the church setting in terms of the worship and the fellowship with each other and so on. So I think that we need to take a closer look at that, and we need probably to start seeing where we can have one or two village Sunday schools. I grew up in Trenton Hill, and I remember going to a village Sunday school that was run by the Swanstons for years. And that is where I learned a lot of courses and observed certain things that were very dynamic. For example, when the traffic passed, it was a way of taking the plate and going close to the road, and people, missionary time, and the cars, and people would stop and put in. It's a dynamic, it could be a very dynamic kind of setting that we need to think carefully about whether or not we could do it on an experimental basis, one or two, see how it goes, and then we could see if we could extend further. Because we live in a very stimulating environment, and as has come out in the presentations, people are distracted by many things. So then we can find a way of moderating some of that distraction that happens all around in the communities. And people wanting to just stay in their homes and watch the TV and go online and so on, and get out there. There has to be an increasing focus on Christian witness and service and reaching the people where they are. But as I listened, I was awed when I listened that, the church has been very active, very active in many ways. But that is what I would like to recommend, that we look at that carefully. Not only just for children, but for adults as well. Sunday school out in the communities.
Thank you very much
can I
for that suggestion.
Can I just say something to her? I think that's a very good point, because I've been thinking that maybe the week needs another day, because on Sundays it is so difficult to have Sunday school, because now the church has changed in terms of like how it is organized. You have various meetings, and you have, long ago it was like leaders meeting and quarterly meeting, and you had a vibrant Sunday school. Now we have this what do you call it, committee, and that committee, and this program after church, and that program, and all kind of thing, and distract the children. So it is very hard to really have a functioning Sunday school inside the chapel on a Sunday. We used to complain about the service is long, but it's not so much the service is long now that I find it's affecting that. Because sometimes you have, sometimes you have organization and they want to take pictures and all kind of things.
Well, that's why we need our church hall, and then that would be. But I want. Yes, I want to give mention though to some people in the live chat who have been following us, like Christine Richards, I suppose in St. Kitts, Shell, they say she said, but Maureen Cantano, she said that New River Church had activities up to at least in the 70s. She remember that. Brother Brown also did a Bible study in Rollins. Who is Brother Brown?
Jimmy Brown, James Brown.
Okay. Then we have Sonia ML. Mr. Henry Bailey is the person on St. Croix. She said Mr. Henry Bailey. Yes. Maureen also said that Mr. Powell and Mr. Clayton started Methodism in Guyana. Yes. Sonia said, I remember the Gingerland Girls Brigade having to go to town when Queen Elizabeth came to Nevis. My memory is the longest day, in my memory, is the longest day of my life. Maureen also said they started Methodism in Guyana. I suppose she's talking about Powell and Clayton.
The Methodist school.
Methodist school in Guyana. I could stand corrected on this, but the posters from the connection with this information. Who is Sonia M? Who's Sonia M? She also says that other divisions in St. Croix that were instrumental in the church starting up there was Arita Maynard, Lorna Maynard, Mr. Selfridge, and others. Christine, Maureen then said Powell and Claxon. So people are following, and that is, they're sharing. I'm not seeing something about Reverend Dante Morose on Monday. Ask the question. I'm not seeing the question.
Oh, continue.
I'm not seeing it. So we are being followed by others, and thanks to those who in the live chat who are sharing what they remember. We are going to just allow Brother Manners to share just before we wrap up, and if anybody else have a burning question.
I mention everything one time then.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to react to her question about a decline in spirituality. I think we have to look at that question in the context of how society has changed over time, because society has changed. It seems to me that religion, and it's a strange thing for me to say, but I wonder whether I should say it, when people have nothing else to do, or when their opportunities are limited, religion occupies the space. Okay? And I think that happened a lot in the early years. People had no TV to watch, no cell phone, nothing else to do. And so the church filled that vacuum and did a good job in filling it. But we have to also recognize that over time, when other things came, then people got attracted away. When the church was started in Gingerland in 1801, they said that the church had 1,400 members. Most of them were still enslaved, am I right? 1801, yes. They were still slaves, so they came to church and found and filled the church. Obviously, they had no choice. It is said in 1843, when there was an earthquake, the population was 883. They were not free, but still with limited opportunity they came to church. So as people are now more enlightened, in the early years, maybe in our youth, I think we have acknowledged, people were not as enlightened, not as educated, and you can get passed by preaching. In other words, some things that local preachers said in my young day, we couldn't get away with them today because the people swallow it. They could say anything. They didn't have much preparation to do. Now you couldn't do it. People are more enlightened. And so,
but when you speak about spiritualism, and you spoke about 800 coming then, they came to church then to not only for the spiritual aspect, it was socializing. Remember, there are slaves out there all the time. So that is when they may see each other and could share and could socialize in other ways. So it wasn't strictly spiritualism that they came for, you see.
Well, I
Yes.
guess my question really, with the issue of spirituality, is more, I'm not sure how to phrase it, but I will say more of a connection to God. You know, that's I think what I'm driving at. The connection to God. A lot of us are just doing the lip service. We come to church in routine. You understand? Miss made a mention about the praying, and you also referenced the praying. There was the upper room. There was, regardless of whether it was 100, 1400, or 1000, there were those who were devoted spiritually coming to church. They wanted to worship. You understand me? So there was that element of that committed, coming from within, wanting to have that connection with God. Now we have a church where, because we sing in choruses, and there is no element of worship. You understand? Hymn singing used to be lusty and vibrant, and you understand me? Now you begging people to literally just sing up. You understand? So I'm just trying to, and then I guess too, bringing our church forward. What can we do? Or what do we need to do to bring that element back? And this has absolutely nothing to do with the competitions that we probably have with the other churches, in bringing our church, and we're talking about Gingerland, in bringing our Gingerland church back. How do you bring back that element of spirituality?
But not only just bringing the church back, but when we think of our Methodist hymns, they'd rather come up here and sing other things, whereas we were taught Methodist hymns in the schools, for school assembly and so forth. The Methodist hymn was sung.
I learned the Methodist hymns based off the ministers and the preachers who, on a Sunday, if you sing the song wrong, they stop you, they stop the whole congregation. They stop the whole congregation and they fix the song.
Yes.
That was me, in my experience, they stop the no, we're doing it this way, and you fix it. So
places like the South Caribbean, the schools, you go to even, it was a government school now, but it came out of Methodism, and they sing Methodist hymns because most of them had Methodist principles, etc. So we're coming to the end and wrapping up.
Just to correct an information from Mr. Bailey, the Women's Association, Young Women's Association was started by Mrs. Neal.
I stand corrected. I will let Mrs. Liebert know.
She did bring it up.
Okay.
Yes.
Quickly, in connection with what you said, I think people, especially the young people, have lost a sense of God. What do I mean by that? A sense of God. In other words, God is not important. Okay, as if God is not important. And I think what the church has to begin to kind of emphasize, no matter how you write, and no matter how, you still need that sense of God.
Of God.
Okay, that is being lost. People feel because I so and so, I don't need
One
that.
Sunday, Papa, we need to shut down the screens. Notice hardly anybody walk with Bible.
With Bible,
and
joining
books
books.
anymore. And so if the electricity goes, everything on silent. So one Sunday we come and we sing.
Well,
We sing and we sing.
When you remember the little harvest play that was there, they said that you were teaching all the hymn books because nobody picking them up, and the Bibles.
I want to mention quickly, we cannot, sorry.
Sorry, before it goes out of my mind, there's a serious something.
Say,
Anyway, I'm being honest there. I wanted to say that Sister Daisy's question is very relevant. Yes. Very relevant, and it is something that we need to grapple with and see what
understanding that spiritual growth is very important and that we serve an all-knowing God who knows about us, and we really need to ensure that we practice, what we preach, and we just try to grow spiritually. So I just wanted to say that, because we could just be wasting a lot of time, and not giving ourselves opportunities to grow spiritually. And I just wanted to emphasize something.
Could I mention quickly two things I thought we should mention? We cannot close without mentioning the church organ. We have a lovely organ now, but I saw a picture only yesterday, I think, of the pipes.
Yeah, the
pipes we used to have. Or we can go even further back. I remember the bellows. Some of you are not old enough, but I remember in my young days, we had an organ which had to be pumped with air. Somebody had to stand there and pump something to pump air to the organ to play. And if you stop pumping, the organ stopped right there in that corner. That's one thing I want to mention. The other thing I wanted to mention was the Girls and Boys Brigade. Sometimes we also in the picture here, we forget. Well, we overlook the impact of the Girls and Boys Brigade.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Alice isn't here. I stood in the yard one afternoon after we had a meeting, and I looked at the yard. The Girls and the Boys Brigade were meeting, and I had to stand up in awe, because there were lots of children. Some were running up and down, some were playing cricket, some was playing drums, and I said, what a beautiful sight. All these children on Tuesday afternoon. I checked with Alice, and she tells me the numbers are 99 between boys and girls. So you have 99 people.
No, it's 100.
Okay, 100 running up and down.
Yes.
Methodists and non-Methodists. That to me was a beautiful
June?
I was just about to state almost the same thing that Mr. Mann just spoke about. I don't think it's all doom and gloom, because when you look at, when you listen to other members of the community, I think they commend the Methodist Church for the work they're doing with the youth groups, because even though we look like we're going down, I think that from the community point of view, we are still doing a good job compared to other churches. So I think that we are to be commended for the youth groups and the young people, just like what Mr. Mann said with the Girls and Boys Brigade and the other groups, because many of the churches, they are not as active as others. So I just want to make that point that we are not that bad, even though there's room for improvement.
I think that's an important point. So as we wrap up this, yes, go right ahead.
We need the bell.
Need the what?
Bell.
So we're going to ask the Women's League to put the funds together, because we're going to get a bell. I think the bell is very important too. It says something to the community. So we look forward to a bell. The gift for the 90th anniversary, the gift of a bell. Women's League, the gift of a bell. So as we wrap up, we're going to ask each presenter just to give one sentence, two sentences on their...
There's one thing which I think I would like to throw into the mix, namely the role that the family has or has not played in terms of all that we've been speaking about tonight. I think it is true to say that there was a time, the family played a very important role in instilling spiritual values in our youngsters. As a child, if you made the mistake of singing an inappropriate song in the house on a Sunday, your parents made you painfully aware that you were out of line. I don't think that a lot of that happens today. So I think we need to remember that the parents have a very important part to play in instilling the positive values in their children.
Thank you very much, Reverend Manners. Mr. Bailey, are you ready?
Yeah. I want to summarize, add a few things. I recognize the important value and role of the church in the spiritual domain and so on. But I want to talk about a few things very quickly. Life skills that are taught via the church. Embroidery, the Girls Brigade does a lot of that. The cake decorating class that I almost mentioned. Teaching adult literacy. Teaching people to read. Not necessarily in the church, but members of the church to do their own missions. You can't ignore that. Teaching people C6 subjects, helping them along the ladder. Elocution, having to do your recitation, give that smart salute and so on. You learn diction, you learn to talk, you learn to project your voice and so on. Don't know where the people are now, but that was a starting point for many of us. And the whole aspect of the discovery of talent. I mentioned the girl who came to the choir, couldn't turn a tune, and left as one of the leading singers. So that aspect of developing talent, developing our life skills, these are things that people can make a living off of. And the church has to be commended for the role it has played in that aspect also.
Thank you very much. And not has played, but we're hoping that it will continue to play that role. Okay. Sister Williams?
Yeah, well, there are many other things we could have said here tonight with regards to the church, because as I sit here, my mind goes back on many things we could have said, but time is against us. I would like to say that I am very happy to be here, and I would like to end on what Desmond said, because when all is said and done, at the end, when Christ comes and puts in his appearance, we have to give an account, and our spiritual life is going to be the one that I think will matter in the end. So I think that's a very important point she brought up, and we must keep it in mind. And I would like to end on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sister Avril Williams.
I would like to use my time just to mention two things. To mention, it's in my article which you can read, the fact that 2 ministers, ordained ministers, have come from this church over the past 90 years. Some would say it should have been 10 or 12, but we make mention of two, Reverend Manners, who was ordained in 1977, and Reverend Anika, who was ordained in 2013. So there's still room for more. The other thing I want to mention is the way I ended my article. Reverend Oral Thomas, who will be here on Sunday, published a book which was sold, and I took an excerpt from it. He made the point in the last chapter that many churches are creating monuments out of movements. In other words, they're supposed to be a spiritual movement, but people have made monuments which was created in 1950, and they celebrate that rather than celebrating an ongoing movement. So we are warned not to make the chapel a monument, because it's more important to have a movement through it, based on all the stuff we discussed tonight.
That's a challenge that we could, you see. No, I haven't seen any. So I want to thank the co-presenters, Reverend Franklin E. Manners, Brother Hansel Manners, Brother Elvin Bailey, and Sister Avril Williams. But I also want to thank Sister Hailita Liebert in her absence, because she did quite a bit of research, and she sent on. We're sorry she could not be here in person. At this time, I also want to thank especially Sister Deslyn Johnson, always there. And for those who cannot come, and when we see if people with a live chat, people are following and people are interested in what is going on. I want to thank Sister Vanetta Moving for opening us in prayer, and I want to thank Sister Hazel Shriverton for being my timekeeper although these people couldn't keep time, put up a finger. But what they had to say was really burning, so we had to allow them to say a little more. Remember the challenges given. There were so many of them. Go on this outdoor Sunday school, you know, get involved. Not what you said to the movement. We have to really celebrate and not just looking at history. And there are many other things. And again, I said it would be really, really profitable if after they have done all this research that we can put it together for the 90th anniversary, as we said, at least if it's not a whole book, a booklet, so that we could see, especially the suggestions about moving on. The history is very important, but the suggestions. So we thank you all again for coming. And as the audience, we really thank you, because if you didn't come, I saw the faces before. When we started, we wondered what would happen. So with this now, I would ask Reverend Franklin E. Manners, the pastor of the Gingerland Methodist Church in Nevis. Before I ask him to close off in prayer, I want to thank the audience who are on social media, YouTube, for not just, listening. There may be many more listening, but also participating. We give them thanks. Thank you very much, Reverend Manners.
Yes, so I'm going to take off my panelist's hat at this point and put on my minister's hat. And I take the opportunity to say thanks to our moderator, Mrs. Hyacinth Rose Manners, who was asked at fairly short notice, but has stepped up to the plate. And we are very grateful. Mention was already made of Mrs. Johnson. I want to just add to that. When I approached her, she said, I think I'll have to find somebody to send, because she had another appointment. I'm very glad that she did find somebody to send, namely herself. And I'm sure she did that at some sacrifice. Thank you very much. Looking forward, I want to make mention of the activity for Thursday night. As you know, it's going to be a sing-along, sing-spiration, and in that connection, you will be suggesting what we will sing, so come prepared, please. We may have some challenges, since you will be saying on the spot what you would like us to sing. It may present a challenge in terms of presenting the words on the screen. So bring your hymn books. Bring your hymn books. Both hymn books, so that we have something to sing from. Okay? And we will also be having remembrances. And again, we expect you to speak about what you know. Nobody will be here presenting as we did tonight. You will be the speakers, so please come prepared to speak up.
Them alone, you're not going to bring for more people.
And of course, please ensure that others come as well. So each one of you go out and spread the word and make sure, compel them to come in.
Let's get the panelists up.
And with that, we sing the doxology.
Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise Him, all creatures here below. Praise Him above the heavenly hosts. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen.
The grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all now and forevermore. Amen.
Thank you. Thanks to those who put the tables together. Thank you.